Hey everyone, Michael Pickens here. Welcome to the weekday Libertarian Leadership Academy live stream. Today, we've got a veteran from the Libertarian Party. He's been around for a long time, former chair of the National Party from 1985 to 1989. Does that sound about right, Jim?
December of '88, to be very precise about it. I
88.
didn't
I was
quite
so
make it to
close.
'89.
Yeah, so you became chair when I was 1 year old.
Wow. Yeah, I remember that.
Yes, you remember that. And
I
he's
bet you don't.
also no, I definitely don't. He's also an Altamont Springs City Commissioner. Jim, welcome to the show.
Glad to be here. Thanks for inviting me. I'm honored.
Now, before we get into the boring, what does a Altamont Springs City Commissioner do and all that same stuff we always talk about, I'd like to actually highlight one of your accomplishments, and it is the Turney collection of videos from libertarianism.org. It's like 170 videos. Can you tell me about this?
Well, that's a small fraction of the recordings that I made at Libertarian, or I call it Libertarian interest organizations,
Okay.
conferences and events over a period from, let me think, 1977 through the last one was probably in about 2001, but I pretty much slowed down in 1994, 1995, and didn't do too many in that last 5 or 6 year period.
Hmm.
So this is what happened was about, I guess, 12 years ago or so, um, maybe even more, 15 times getting away. The David Bose at Cato Institute and I were talking, and I was telling him, well, I was living in Europe at the time. I'd been living in Europe since 2002 at the time. And so I was saying, I really do want to digitize all those things, but, I can't easily do it and right now with the situation. So he said, well, let me get involved. And so we did a project to, he selected those 170, actually it was more than 200. I don't know the number off the top of my head.
Hmm.
He selected those from my collection and said, those are the ones that I think would work at libertarianism.org. So that's what we did. We digitized those, and he put them up there. And altogether, though, in the database, there are um, something like, I think, about 4,000 recordings. And
$4,000?
they are sitting right in front of me right now. I can't turn around the camera because you wouldn't see them, but I have a room that is nothing but audio and video tapes, analog tapes. That's all it is, literally tight, very narrow shelves. It's all labeled and organized, but just narrow shelves to walk in and pick the tapes out that need to be handled or dealt with. And I'm still anxious to digitize them. And I do occasionally do one, and they still come out pretty well, much like the
Hmm.
ones you can see right now on YouTube that you just were, uh, you've got it there on the screen. Anyway, so there's still a lot to be done. Now, obviously, all of them probably aren't worth the digitization because I would essentially record everything at a Libertarian Party state convention, Libertarian Party national conventions, Cato Institute events, Reason Foundation events, Independent Institute events, and a lot of other organizations, including there's a whole trove of them that are a national organization for the reform of
Yep.
marijuana laws and all of their annual conventions. And so those are obviously not per se libertarian conferences, but
Sure.
obviously, especially at that time more than now, they were of pretty much libertarian interest, and because libertarians were about the only people, at least the active political people, who were advocating for the change in the marijuana laws. Certainly not the average Democrat or Republican, at least. And
Yeah.
so that's why I was covering all of those, and I covered other things that were of, let's say, more marginal interest to libertarians, like, for example, the L5 conferences, where it was the privatization of space was the big deal, and early entrepreneurs who were trying to privatize space flight, and of course the government was keeping them very repressed, and so those were still, again, interesting to libertarians in particular. A lot of libertarians were at that conference, those conferences, plural, and they, and of course now, by the way, I can literally turn around and 20 feet that way are the thousands of tapes that are not yet digitized, and 20 feet that way is my front door, and I can go to my front door. I don't have to go outside, just open it up and see a rocket launch about twice or three times a week that is private. So, you know, a lot has happened since I started recording, but so that's a long answer to your question, kind of give you the scope of that collection that you have. You're talking about a relatively small fraction of it, but that's good.
Wow.
That's some of the best stuff. There's, I mean, some really obviously high quality presentations that I recorded are in that collection you're referring to on YouTube.
Yeah, so you've seen a lot of the libertarian greats in person and recorded them. How old were you when you were doing this?
Well, I'm going to be 75 next week. A little tip, so that I was not young when I started. I started as a libertarian in 1964. That's the year
Mhm.
that I adopted the word, calling myself libertarian. My identity. And so, for example, speaking of conferences, I did not record this one. Boy, do I wish I had. But the foundation of the modern libertarian movement is often thought to be the 1969 Young Americans for Freedom Conference in St. Louis, where there was a lot of libertarians, including me, that were in Young Americans for Freedom. At the time, that
Mhm.
was the only place in the 1960s where you could go to an event and find other libertarians. And even then, there are not too many, but there were
Yeah.
hundreds of us that showed up at that convention. And there were hundreds of people that were what we call trads, meaning traditional conservatives. And they kind of dominated at that convention. So the libertarians walked out. And that was what kicked off the modern libertarian movement. The consequences of that walkout were the Libertarian Party, for example, and the Society for Individual Liberty, which is now part of another organization which I helped found, which at the time was called Libertarian International.
Yep.
In 1989, Libertarian International merged with the Society for Individual Liberty, creating the International Society for Individual Liberty, and then it's changed its name again to Liberty International. So
Yeah, I
I'm
remember.
honored to have been one of the three founders of that. Unfortunately, the other two are no longer with us, but missing friends, sorry to say.
Yeah, I remember when ISIL, the International Society for Individual Liberty, changed their name a few years back because
Yeah.
of the terrorist group ISIL,
Yeah.
and they were getting, death threats to their Facebook page. I remember Mary Ruart, and I helped design the Liberty International logo, the new one
Oh,
with the
really?
the
Wow.
heart earth. Yeah.
Yeah,
So
cool. I didn't know that.
yeah,
Well,
that's awesome.
it was founded in my offices in Richmond, Virginia in the early 80s, in 81, 82, and operated out of there for years. And I did protest, complain, whatever the right word is, to my friends who were all for changing the name in 1989. They were getting nervous about the name Libertarian at the time because Libertarian was not like a well-known identity or name.
Sure.
And so they were getting nervous about it. And they said, well, we're going to drop that name and go with International Society for Individual Liberty when we merge. I said, no, Libertarian International. That's going to be the winner. And
Yep.
so I wish they'd changed it back to Libertarian International instead of Liberty International. It's still a bone to pick, So it doesn't help to be one of the only surviving founder, I guess, of the organization, because they still aren't following my advice on the nomenclature. But that's, of course, a petty point, actually. But yeah, since you were talking about the name,
Were
that's
were you
my take on it.
yeah, were you in Denver when the Libertarian Party was founded?
I was not. In those
Okay.
days, we did not have the internet. And it's hard to remember that, but we didn't. What did we do? In those days, to make a phone call in the United States outside of your local area, which would be like, not even as big as Los Angeles, but like, Richmond, Virginia, or, St. Louis or whatever. If you called outside that local area, you would pay probably in today's money about $1 a minute for the call. It was very expensive.
Yeah.
And it was brutal. So we didn't communicate very easily. And so I did not hear about that event, unfortunately, even though I was a known libertarian, very well known, I guess, considering how small the libertarian movement was in those days. But somehow I wasn't on the right list. So I didn't get a call or letter. So I did not know about it until after it happened. However, in the year 1972, I turned 21. And in those days, that's how old you had to be to vote. There's my vote T-shirt. Anyway, you had
to be 21 to vote in 1971.
Well, actually, technically not true. They changed the law in I think 1970, reducing the age to 18. However,
Gotcha.
I had already. So I was one of the in-between people who got screwed. I couldn't vote when I was 18. When I was 18, it was not allowed to vote. When I was 21, it was 18. You could vote. So I was like, okay, I voted for the first time in 1972. And the reason that's important is because I heard about the Libertarian Party. I heard about John Hospers and Tony Nathan, who at the time I did not know. Of course, I got to know them pretty well over the following years, but I did not know them at all at the time. And so I went in to vote in 1972 and looked at the ballot. I could vote for Richard Nixon, or I could vote for George McGovern, and I was in Virginia at the time, I could write in. I wrote in John Hospers, and that made me, at 75, a person who can say that I have only voted for the Libertarian Party candidate for president my entire life in every election. And I had to write it in 1972 to get it done. So anyway, I did hear about it, but I wasn't in. If I had heard about the Denver meeting beforehand, good chance I wouldn't have been able to make it, because that would have been real
Quite a trip.
expensive. In 71, you'd either have to drive, but gas was cheap. So that would have probably been the cheapest way to get from Virginia to Denver. But flying was for the rich in those days. We didn't deregulate airlines until 1979. And then, of course, the prices came down dramatically and became more like bus service, where pretty much anybody and everybody can use it.
Yeah, a lot of people don't know John Hospers, back in 1972 when he was running, he was only on the ballot in 2 different states, right?
Yeah.
He was in Colorado and Washington, and that was it. That was it. So talk about ballot access and the growth, from then until now. So I have this specific video pulled up because I found Nathaniel Brandon from your videos. And he wrote, and I've got a ton of his books now from it, and I've got the audio books, the 6 Pillars of Self-Esteem, a bunch of books on self-confidence and self-esteem and all of that. But I think that this video right here, what happens when the libertarian movement begins to succeed, should be required for every Libertarian Party member. Now, I don't think it should be required. I think it should be suggested, right? We're not going to coerce people,
You're not for mandates? What?
No, definitely not for mandates. But it's so interesting because he talks about when the libertarian movement begins to succeed, there's a lot of people who are not familiar with success. And success to them, they might be allergic to it, right? And they might shoot themselves in the foot because they're becoming successful. And it's that fear of success that we need to overcome. Because what happens is that the party devolves into infighting, right? And we've seen, and I'm sure you've seen this in cycles over the years, right? So this isn't something new with the Mises Caucus that just happened a few years ago. There's cycles of this that happen over the years. Can you touch on that, what you've seen?
Well, the most notable one, especially since we're talking about libertarianism.org and all these videos that are there, which is a Cato Institute operated website. The most notable previous experience to what we've experienced the last couple of years was in 1983 at our national convention, which was in New York City that year. It was a presidential nominating convention because in those days, because of ballot access difficulties, we had to nominate our candidate more than a year before the election. So we had our presidential nominating conventions, in the odd year preceding a presidential election year, so that we
I
would
like
be
that.
able to get on the ballot. Well, that we
Yeah.
didn't really want to do it, but because it meant that our conventions, everybody was, what are you guys doing? You're a little out of sync with the rest of the world, aren't you? And so it's unfortunate, but and we were now, by the way, our next national presidential nominating convention. Thank God it's going to be on President's Day weekend. And so it won't be so late in the year, because we are right now hurting ourselves by being too late in the year.
Yeah.
Again, everybody asking, what? Everybody's already nominated their candidate. Why are you guys just getting around to it? Which of course means they're not paying attention, because the Republican and Democratic national conventions are even later than Memorial Day. But anyhow, they don't know that. They already think they know who the candidate is, generally,
Sure.
at least in most years. And anyhow, so we had to nominate early. Well, we had a Florida man, and I'm sitting in Florida, remind your listeners, we had a Florida man who was the presumptive candidate for the Libertarian Party in 1983, who was a very well-known in this area, Orlando. I got to know him pretty well. His name was Gene Burns. He was a radio host and a Orlando Sentinel newspaper. That's the big daily newspaper here still. He was a op-ed editorialist for there, and he became a libertarian in 1982, and he would talk about libertarianism every day on his radio program, which was an early successful talk radio program in the days before talk radio became a big thing. And it was very powerful here in Orlando area. Everybody knew about libertarianism, it seemed like, and I already had been here for 15 years. So everybody suddenly was coming up to me going, Jim, hey, you're not the only one. Gene Burns is a libertarian. Wow. And so there was a lot of interest in libertarianism because of that. And he was very eloquent. And by the way, one of the videos, or maybe even two of them that you have on that list, are Gene Burns talking.
Interesting. Okay.
So you ought to check out Gene Burns. So here's what happened. So he was everybody in the Libertarian Party said, well, he's the great guy for our presidential candidate in 1984. Nobody wanted to run against him. So he was the only candidate. Well, he misunderstood. I did my best to try to help him understand how different it would be to be a candidate of the Libertarian Party for president as opposed to a Republican or Democrat. But of course, most people, including him, didn't really understand this, how different that can be.
Sure.
So he started getting cold feet. And I talked him out of quitting twice, but the last time I couldn't. And actually, by that time, many other people in the Libertarian Party were, already talking with him, of course, and they couldn't either. So he quit. He pulled out just like a week or 10 days before our presidential nominating convention. Since, I'll remind you again, in those days, we did not have internet. So that meant everybody got to New York to nominate him for president, and only a handful of people knew that he was not running. So there proceeded to be, there was a brewing fight already in the LP, and I won't get into explaining the cleavage points and frictions there. I'll just say, all good people, but different strategies and techniques and emphasis on this or that issues, that kind of thing. And so it turned into a brutal fight. And the real harm, we are still, to this day, suffering significantly from that split that happened in the 1983 presidential nominating convention, because it got bitter. So what we used to call the Crane machine, which was named after Ed Crane, who was, of course, the founder and president for 20 years of Cato Institute. So that's why it's appropriate that we talk about this, that side of it pulled out. So the Cato people, we'll call it and that was often what people did call it, because so many people that were involved with Cato Institute were also the leadership of the party.
Mhm.
And they all walked. They all walked. It was a disaster. It was a
Now,
horrible
okay,
disaster.
so Gene dropped out, right? And then
Mhm.
who were the other candidates that
Well,
stepped up?
a guy named Earl Ravenel was the candidate for the quickly recruited candidate of the Cato crowd, we'll call it, the Crane Machine, whatever.
Yeah,
And that he was already a recognized foreign policy expert, and foreign policy was a big deal for the presidential campaign at that year, just like it is now, actually. But it's not every year. Sometimes domestic policy is winning out, but that year he would have been a really great candidate from the point of view of credibility, because he was already a columnist it was a libertarian. That's what he called himself. But he was printed in places like the New York Times and the Washington Post, and all sorts of heavy academic foreign affairs journals. So he was considered a very credible, candidate for president in that, that resume type way. But he wasn't a strong personality. He wasn't the kind of fiery stump speecher or something. The other person who was running that was quickly recruited was David Bergland, who had a
from
long history in
Washington.
the LP. Yeah,
Yeah,
he already had been the vice presidential candidate. He
yep.
had been
Under Andre Moreau.
no under in 76 under Roger McBride.
Roger McBride. Okay, my
Yeah,
bad.
he was the vice presidential candidate for Roger McBride, and with Roger, when Roger ran in 76 as the presidential candidate, which itself is an interesting story, but I won't get into that because, boy, we'll get into so many. We'll be here 30 hours instead of
I do
30
I do
minutes.
want to talk to you about that. I want to talk to you about a couple other things, but we're not going to have enough time
Oh, of
today. But I'll
course. No.
definitely have you back on. So keep going, please.
Well, just to wrap that part up, so that it became the David Berglund crowd versus the Crane Machine. We used to call them Berglandistas because at that time period, the Sandinistas were a big thing down in, I think, El Salvador. They were in the news all the time. So anyhow, that was just without going into detail, the story of the breakup of the LP. All the money people, all the people who had understanding of how to do fundraising, how to do the organizational structure, how to do the FEC reports, all these things that are critical to the infrastructure of a national political party, they walked. And it was a disaster. So that's why when I got elected chair in 1985, things were, it was it was bad. We were bankrupt. I mean, many people told me that I should declare officially bankrupt of the LP because there was no way we could pay our debts. There was no way we could create a fundraising operation and continue to communicate with, which only communication we had again was U.S. Post Office. There was no
Yep.
internet. I know I keep saying that, but it's hard to remember that there was no internet in those days. And boy, were the ramifications significant. Anyhow, the thing, what had happened in the 2 years between 83 presidential nominating convention when things split and our 85 convention, which was in Phoenix, the party had basically just collapsed, and the membership had collapsed, the fundraising had collapsed, the publication was, which we called LP News, was let's say randomly, rarely coming out on no schedule. And most people had written off the LP.
Yeah.
So we all thought it was pretty bad. When I became chair, I discovered pretty quickly that actually it was far worse. The worst of it was being hidden because the people who were running it were trying to get reelected, of course, at that convention.
Oh no.
So they were not, let's say, quite as forthcoming about the
Transparent.
situation. Yeah. So anyhow, and to some extent, they might not have even realized it, although mostly what I discovered was things that they were well aware of, but nobody else was. So anyhow, it was a really heavy lift between 1985 and 1987 to bring the Libertarian Party back from the brink, or maybe even over the brink, and get it back again. And I'm very proud of the fact that I was able to pull that off, not alone. Obviously, other people were critical to that. But to be honest, in 1985, I did not think I was really the right guy to be the chair. But I thought I was just better than the other candidates. And I could
Yeah.
explain that, but that's another story. But I really was like, oh boy, the party is in trouble. And here I am, not the right guy to deal with this. It turns out that I was wrong about that. It just was just by luck. But my experiences, and again, I won't go into detail on that, just to say that I'd had a lot of experiences leading up to that really helped me. I would have never thought that was going to be a valuable experience to running a political party, but it turned out, fortunately, that it was. So we kind of lucked
Yeah.
out on that. I lucked out and the party lucked out, and I was able to pull that off. And of course, I got reelected in 1987, and I've been reelected a number of times. So that's why I call myself Reelect Jim. That's my domain name, reelectjim.com, because I just got reelected for the 5th time to the city commission in Altamont Springs. So I'm Reelect Jim. By the way, there's nothing at that website at the moment. So if you go there to reelectjim.com, you're not going to get anything, because I need to
I did.
rebuild. I need to rebuild that website, because it had to do strictly with, the campaign for reelection, and it's not really relevant. So I took it down. So there's nothing
Yeah.
there at the moment. It needs to be redone. I'm working on
Well,
that.
I feel like we got way off topic, and I should have titled this video or this live stream differently from the direction where it went. I didn't think we would spend so much time on this, but I'm actually very interested in asking you about a couple different presidential election years and what had happened, especially with Russell Means and Ron Paul, two of my libertarian heroes,
Yeah, mine
in
too.
1988, but we're not going to
Yep.
get into this right now. We'll schedule another one because we're only scheduled for 30 minutes. So, man, I feel like we got off track. So you were elected during a time where the party was bankrupt, hemorrhaging members. There was a huge split, right? A bunch of people from the Cato Institute left, and was a group of people who really didn't know how to run a political party left in charge after David Bergland got the nomination. So
Yeah.
it sounds very similar to what's happening right now in the Libertarian Party,
Yep, that's right.
right? So Mises
Yes.
Caucus took over. They didn't really know what they were doing. It was obvious, fundraising went way down, membership went way down. Stephen Nicalia has took over as chair, and Paul Dar as vice chair, and
Mhm.
they were elected by the board. They weren't elected at convention, but I've seen that they've been able to kind of balance the budget, and then now there is a new election coming up next year, right? In where is that? Minnesota coming up. When's the next convention?
No convention. It's going to be in Grand Rapids, Michigan on Memorial Day
Michigan.
weekend. And so please go to, I think it's LPC, what is the domain name? LPC 26, I think is .com.
Yep.
Go there or figure it out. I'm sorry, I should know that off the top of my head. But anyhow, go there and register for that convention. To beg all of your listeners, please go there. And please, one other thing you can do, if you're not sure that if you're going to be able to go at least to that website for the convention and click on the reserve a hotel room, because it doesn't cost you anything to put down a reservation. And then you can, if you change your mind, you decide you can't go, whatever, up to, I think it's 48 hours before the first night of your room, you can cancel with no cost. So there's
Yep.
no cost to going ahead and reserving your room. So I highly recommend you do that. And I would really recommend that you just go ahead and go. And if you can't, so you might have lost what, $120 something for the lowest end package. At least register and pay that, and hopefully you'll be able to make it. But it is difficult to afford all these conventions with the cost of transportation, the cost of lodging,
Sure.
the cost of meals, the cost of course, the convention package. But it's worth it. We need you. The Libertarian Party needs libertarians to be at that convention, and I think you're going to have a good time.
Yeah, so if you're wanting to go to the national convention, you need to make sure that you go to your state party convention if you want to be a delegate, to get
Yeah,
nominated as a
that's right.
delegate. There's some good candidates for chair. I actually just watched the debate last night. I stayed up late watching the debate between all four chair candidates, and I think there's a really good slate of chair candidates. Two of them I know very well: Evan McMahon, who's currently the chair of Libertarian Party of Indiana, and Wes Benedict, who runs the Libertarian Booster Pack. And when I got involved in 2011, when I became a member of the Libertarian Party, Wes Benedict was the executive director, Mark Hinkle was the chair, and I asked them a bunch of questions because I got elected as vice chair of the Libertarian Party of California, had no idea what I was doing, and they helped me out tremendously. Wes has been a huge resource, right? So the other two guys, another guy named Jim from New York. I don't remember his last name. And then Rob Yates from North Carolina. They seemed a lot more inexperienced on running a large organization, whereas Evan McMahon and Wes Benedict, either one of those guys would
Yeah.
probably do a really good job as national
Oh
chair.
yeah, I have a great deal of confidence that you're correct, that those two guys, I don't know the other two, so even if they're perfect, I just don't know. But yeah, definitely Wes Benedict and Evan McMahon are both would, I've every confidence that they would do a good job. I am personally right now looking at Evan as my vote, but that's, I think he's really super well prepared for it. So I think that's a good, I'm going to put a plug in for him because, hey, I'm political. I don't mind campaigning. I campaign for a candidate anytime, like I said.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, then I'm going to put a plug in for Wes.
Well, I love him too, by the way. So it's nothing
like,
personal. I love Wes.
Yeah.
I think he does. I think he'd do a great job as chair. So it's nothing about. It's not like I don't like Wes for the position.
Yeah. So the thing is, I won't be there. So I'm not going to be a delegate. I'm not going to be voting. No, that's okay. I want to stay out of inter-party politics. I'll interview candidates and help them out and do that kind of thing. But inter-party politics stuff is just not what I'm interested in anymore. So.
Well, by the way, it may sound like from what you just heard that I'm somehow super interested. I'm more like you. I don't usually get, and this is a long history now. I know I chaired the party and I chaired the conventions a couple times and all that. And I've been served as regional rep on the LNC.
Oh, yeah.
I've served as at large on the LNC. I've run national conventions like the one in Reno when we had the takeover, and and even the one before that in Orlando when it got moved from Austin to Orlando the last minute because of COVID and all that. And I'm helping this one, by the way, in Grand Rapids. I'm helping a little bit on that as well. But anyhow, the point is, even though I do all of that stuff, believe it or not, I actually, over the decades, have not spent much time on the floor, voting and just going to the mic and letting people know what I think about this, that, or whatever. I'm not really focused on the internal politics of the LP and never have been.
Yeah, I'm interested right now. I used to be, I've been state chair and vice chair and county chair, and I used to care about that kind of stuff. Now I just care that libertarians get elected to office. I don't care if they're ultra libertarian, abolish the government, or if they're minimalists, libertarian, like let's reduce government, authoritarian government, a little bit at a time. I really don't care as long as they get elected so they can make a positive difference in their community.
Bravo. Well, I'm all about electing candidates too, and I've tried to recruit and tried to mentor candidates for a long time. So in fact, that's how I got to be a candidate myself in my city here, because I figured, hey, after all the time and effort I've spent trying to recruit libertarians to run for office and then help them once they do decide to run, it's time for me to go for it myself. So.
Yeah, well, you've been elected. re-elected and re-elected 5 times, and I'm going to have you back on to talk about that. I feel like I kind of switched the conversation on you, and I apologize, but I
So yeah,
still
I thought
think that,
that's what we were going to talk about. I was all ready
yeah,
to go. I'm only kidding. It's fine. I don't mind talking about LP history. Obviously, it's something I
yeah.
know personally about, so I can speak to it.
Well, I just wanted to talk to you about this because I think that the Jim Turney collection on libertarianism.org and on YouTube is something that people should definitely uh, watch, right? There's a ton of videos, but if you can only watch one of them, I think the what happens when the libertarian movement begins to succeed is foundational for everyone that wants to get interested in the Libertarian Party because it'll change your mindset about it. Dr. Nathaniel Brandon, he talks about the breakup and why people push back against success psychologically, and it's just very powerful. So
I'm glad you highlighted that because I'd forgotten about that one. I haven't seen it for many years myself. Yeah, I need to go back and look at it again. Although I'm pretty sure I know what it says. Still, it's a good idea. It's like even I tell people this all the time. Even the greatest athletes have coaches.
yep.
So it is good idea, and sometimes the coach can, in this case, be YouTube. In fact,
Mhm.
the coach for a lot of things people do these days is YouTube or something similar. Anyway, yeah, it's a good idea to be constantly in training. So I do a lot of candidate training myself, even though I give a lot of candidate training and mentoring. I take a lot of candidate training because
Sure.
it helps your focus. It helps you be a better candidate. So it's very important to constantly be willing to accept advice and help from others to improve your game. And that includes your political game.
Absolutely. Well, the next time I have you on, we're going to be talking about that. We're going to be
Okay.
talking about advice from Jim Turney for running for office, getting elected, getting reelected, doing all the things in your community that you should be doing if you want to get elected. So, Jim, I appreciate your time today. Sorry we got off track, but I look forward to
Oh,
chatting
no.
with you again.
As far as I'm concerned, we were on track. We had to, we're ending a year. We're ending 250 years of the United States. I'm ending
Yeah.
my 74th year. So a good time to do a little review there, wasn't it? So
Yes.
we got our history review in, and this is a perfect time. We can now start a new year, and we're off and ready to
Awesome.
go.
Well,
Hey,
looking
be
forward.
healthy and happy for the holidays and for the new year. I look forward to future conversations and um, right here.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Jim. I appreciate it.
All the best.